The Japanese attacked the U.S. naval base Pearl Harbor in Hawaii on December 7, 1941. In response to the attack, President Franklin D. Roosevelt signed Presidential Proclamation No. 2525. This proclamation declared anyone living in the U.S. of Japanese ancestry was liable to be apprehended, restrained, or removed as alien enemies. More than 1,200 Japanese community leaders were arrested without due process. The next day, the U.S. declared war on Japan. In January of 1942, all Japanese American Selective Service registrants were classified as 4C, or enemy aliens, meaning they were no longer eligible for service in the U.S. military. Despite the Hawaii Territorial Guard, made up of largely Nisei or second-generation Japanese Americans, having been mobilized during the attack on Pearl Harbor. On February 19, 1942, President Roosevelt issued Executive Order 9066, which allowed the military to designate areas from which anyone could be excluded for any reason. Although the order does not specify Japanese Americans, the order followed tense discussions of the removal of Japanese Americans, both Issei, first-generation immigrants, and Nisei, second generation, from the West Coast without evidence of disloyalty. Once the military area had been established, a number of exclusion orders followed. These orders required all Japanese Americans to register at a civil control center and eventually be removed from their homes, businesses, and lives. Japanese Americans were instructed to pack their belongings and relocate to temporary holding centers. These holding centers were typically desolate areas where they were given quarters in rudimentary barracks. The barracks often were slightly modified horse stalls. Multiple families would often be placed together, and bathrooms and mess halls were shared areas. After a period of time, the families were relocated into more permanent camps across the U.S. Most camps were situated in the Midwest, with 2 located here in Arkansas. By 1942, the U.S. government were beginning to feel the need for more recruits into the military. They began to look for volunteers among the interned Japanese Americans, specifically among the Nisei. In preparation for war with Japan, the U.S. military realized the need for Japanese language speakers. The Nisei became the obvious choice. However, the Army soon discovered that few Nisei were fluent in Japanese, and that the language used by the Japanese military was particularly complicated. The Army selected about 60 men for language school at the Presidio in San Francisco. Eventually, about 6,000 Japanese Americans, mostly recruited from concentration camps, served with the Military Intelligence Service in the Pacific. In 1943, Service Form 304A, or the Loyalty Questionnaire, was distributed by the War Relocation Authority to all Nisei men residing in the internment camps throughout the country, and all Nisei men who had been inducted into the military previously. The questionnaire produced much less than the desired amount of volunteer recruits for the military. Many Nisei were offended by the questionnaire and used it as a means to protest their internment. Many of the soldiers who assisted during the attack on Pearl Harbor were members of the 100th Infantry Battalion. Following Pearl Harbor and the subsequent internment of mainland citizens of Japanese ancestry, the 100th was ordered back to the mainland without their weapons. Many of them feared that they were to be made into a non-combat battalion. However, they were sent to training and eventually joined with the newly formed 442nd Regimental Combat Team. The 442nd Combat Team's motto was "Go for Broke." This motto represented the predicament they faced both abroad and at home. They felt the ultimate way to prove their loyalty to the United States was to serve in the war with courage and gusto. The 442nd was deployed in April of 1944. The team invaded and liberated southern France from Nazi control. They fought with the 92nd Infantry, an African-American unit, pushing Nazis out of northern Italy. The team holds the distinction of being the most decorated unit for its size. Collectively, the unit earned over 4,000 Purple Hearts, over 4,000 Bronze Stars, 560 Silver Stars, 21 Medals of Honor, and 7 presidential citations. In 2010, all members of the 442nd were awarded Congressional Gold Medals. Undaunted by the perils of World War II and the prejudice against them at home, the members of the 442nd proved their loyalty. Undaunted courage, proven loyalty is on view now at the MacArthur Museum of Arkansas Military History.